There comes a moment in life when you simply stop. You stop chasing, stop pleasing, stop trying to be accepted. And it is exactly then that everything starts to fall into place. How many times have you felt like you were trying too hard to be someone others would approve of? How many times have you been consumed by the anxiety of appearing, of meeting expectations, of winning, only to lose yourself even more? Today, I want to tell you a story. But it's not just a story, it's a mirror. It's about me, about you, and about anyone who has ever desperately tried to make it in a world that values masks more than truth. This idea that stopping caring is a turning point may sound dangerous or even irresponsible at first. After all, from an early age, we're taught to care about everything. About what others think, about the perfect career, about social standards, about likes, about performance. But what if that teaching is slowly killing us from the inside? Carl Jung once said, "What you resist persists." And maybe that's the key to everything. Maybe the more we try to control, to please, to fit in, the further we drift from who we really are, and the more we create inner resistance. This reflection was born from a text that went viral online, but it resonates deeply because it speaks to something essential. It's a philosophy of detachment, not indifference, but freedom. Inspired by thinkers like Jung, Nietzsche, and even Stoics like Seneca and Epictetus, this idea reveals a truth most of us are not ready to hear. You only find yourself when you stop trying to be something else. And that's exactly what this video wants to show you. Through stories, reflections, and questions you may have never asked yourself, we will walk together through the 7 steps of a journey that begins in exhaustion and ends in awakening. But before anything else, take a breath and listen with an open heart, because this is not about giving up, it's about finally beginning. Have you noticed how we're always trying to get there? But exactly where is there? Since childhood, we've been programmed to chase the highest grade, the ideal body, the dream job, the perfect relationship. We live as if on a treadmill, always moving, but never getting anywhere. The South Korean philosopher Byung-Chul Han, in his book The Burnout Society, talks precisely about this. According to him, we live in a time where freedom has become oppression, because now we are slaves to ourselves. No one forces us anymore. We force ourselves to perform, to win, to be our best version all the time. And that is profoundly exhausting. I've been there myself, trying to prove my worth, trying to show that I was smart enough, productive enough, good enough, trying to be seen, recognized, accepted. But do you know what happened at the end of the day? I would lie down with an empty soul, because everything I was trying to build had nothing to do with me. It was just a facade. And you? How many parts of yourself are being shaped by the fear of not being enough? How many decisions do you make not because they're true, but because they're safe, socially accepted? Right. That's the starting point of transformation. The recognition of exhaustion. The moment you realize that you can't go on, that living to please everyone is a slow emotional suicide, that trying to be someone is the best way to forget who you are. The Stoic Marcus Aurelius said, "It is foolish to try to please others. It is wiser to live in harmony with your own nature." But how do you do that in a world where your nature seems constantly at odds with external expectations? It's simple and painful. You need to stop, not living, but pretending, fighting battles that aren't yours, carrying burdens that don't belong to you. Stop trying to be someone so you can start remembering who you are. And that remembering begins in silence, in emptiness, in letting go of the character. But we'll understand that better in the next chapter. Have you ever felt like you're constantly trying to fit into an invisible mold? That no matter how much you try to please, to fit in, to belong, there's always discomfort, pressure, a lingering anguish? The truth is that we live in an age where caring has become a silent prison. Caring too much about what others think, about what they expect from you, about what you should be. A prison of expectations, often unspoken but deeply rooted. This text is the result of days of deep reflection on something many of us live, but rarely stop to examine: the impact of carrying the world on your shoulders, even though no one ever asked you to. And more importantly, what happens when you simply decide to let go of that weight? That's what we're going to talk about here. But don't expect a shallow motivational speech. This is a journey through the ideas of Jung, Nietzsche, Seneca, Epictetus, and through the stories of real people, past and present, who understood, either by hardship or by choice. That true power is born when you stop trying to please the world and begin to live aligned with your own axis. We live in times when people are getting sick from excess image, where someone's worth is mistaken for their ability to be externally validated. And it's not hard to understand why. Carl Jung said that the greatest problem of modern man is that he has lost connection with his instincts. In other words, we have forgotten who we are because we are constantly trying to be what others expect. This disconnection, this emptiness, this constant anxiety are symptoms of a brutal distancing from what makes us human. We are constantly trying to fill a void with recognition, with validation, with likes, with acceptance. But no one taught us that this emptiness cannot be filled from the outside. Throughout this video, we will break down that cycle. We'll understand why stopping caring, in the deepest sense of the word, can be the beginning of everything. It's not about becoming insensitive, egocentric, or indifferent. It's about freeing yourself from the need for approval, about living with authenticity, and, paradoxically, about finding lightness and success when you finally let go of what was never yours to carry. The story we are about to tell is yours, is mine, is that of every human being who, at some point in life, realized they were tired and decided to change. Imagine a young person who, from an early age, learned to measure their own worth by the grades they got in school, then by their parents' approval, then by how many friends they had, later by their professional achievements, their salary, their house, their body, their ideal partner. This story is common. It's the story of almost all of us. And it is also the story of a cycle that never ends until you decide to break it. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher, said that the one who lives according to their nature, not according to the opinions of others, is free. But what happens when, since childhood, you are conditioned to depend on those opinions for everything? You become a slave to performance, a slave to the external gaze, a slave to the expectations of others. This cycle is insidious. It doesn't start with big decisions, but with small concessions. You take a job you don't like because it's the right thing to do. You enter a relationship out of fear of being alone. You say yes when you wanted to say no. You mold yourself to fit where there is no space for your truth. And the most frightening part is that this is often encouraged by those we love the most. Parents, friends, teachers, colleagues, all trying their best, but within a broken logic. Nietzsche spoke of the importance of becoming who you are. But how can you become something you were never allowed to be? The answer is simple but painful. First, you need to unlearn. Unlearn the need for approval. Unlearn measuring your worth by external standards. Unlearn trying to be loved for something you're not. This unlearning is the beginning of freedom, and it is also the start of a deep internal journey, perhaps the hardest of all. Today, this prison has taken on new forms. Social media, for example, are constant showcases for approval. The feed has become a stage, life a performance, and any slip-up can mean rejection. We live in an era where being genuine is dangerous, but necessary, because only when you dare to be who you are, even if it costs you sideways glances, rejection, and judgment, do you begin to build something solid within yourself. Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." But if you react to everything from a place of fear, of not being accepted, who is really living your life? Stopping caring in that sense is an act of courage. It is the first step out of the invisible prison. And like any act of courage, it hurts, because it shakes everything built on illusions. But it also sets you free. And as Jung said, you do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The next step is understanding where this need to please originates and how it becomes ingrained so early that we don't even realize we've been shaped by it. The need to please is a seed planted early. In childhood, we learn that love comes with conditions, that our acceptance depends on how well we obey, how good we are, how much we hide our most authentic impulses. This is how what Carl Jung called the persona is formed, the social mask we wear to survive in society. The persona is necessary. It allows us to live in community, to build relationships, to play roles. But when we confuse ourselves with that mask, we lose touch with the self, the authentic core of our psyche. Imagine a child who, when expressing sadness, is called weak, when showing anger, is punished, when asking questions, is ignored. This child learns to stay silent, learns to smile even when in pain, learns that being loved means hiding parts of herself. Time passes. She grows, studies, works, has relationships, but something inside her remains incomplete, a hole no achievement can fill. This is the reality of many adults today. They live seemingly functional lives but carry within them an existential emptiness they cannot explain. That emptiness is the price of a life lived to please. Jung said, "What you resist persists. What you accept transforms." When we resist the truth of who we are, when we hide our shadows to please, they don't go away. They deepen and one day explode in the form of crises, anxieties, depressions, psychosomatic illnesses. Stoic philosophy also points to this dilemma. Epictetus invites us to distinguish between what is and isn't within our control. But is pleasing others under our control? Is other people's opinion under our control? Of course not. Yet many of us build our identity around these uncontrollable factors. We need to recognize that this need to please is a survival strategy, but one that over time kills us from within. Only by facing that wound can we begin a healing process. Healing begins with permission. Permission to be imperfect, to disappoint, to say no, to frustrate expectations, to be who we really are, even if the world doesn't know what to do with that. In today's world, this process is even harder. We live under the logic of image, performance, and calculated success. To show vulnerability is almost a subversive act, but it is precisely that vulnerability that connects us to what is most human. When we stop protecting ourselves all the time, when we stop trying to please everyone, we begin to find space for self-knowledge, and with it, a kind of power that does not depend on external validation. Nietzsche said, "Become who you are." But to do so, we must abandon the project of pleasing the world. In the next chapter, we will explore what happens when you make that choice, when, for the first time, you choose yourself, even if it costs you the loss of certain relationships, roles, and certainties. Stopping caring does not happen overnight. It's a process, and like every deep process, it begins with a collapse. Usually, that turning point comes in times of crisis. A loss, a breakup, burnout, an existential collapse. That feeling of, "I can't take this anymore. This doesn't make sense." It is at that point that many, unknowingly, begin the path back to themselves. The philosopher Martin Heidegger called this ontological anguish. It's not just any sadness. It's the deep discomfort of living a life that is not your own, of playing a role written by others, of being a stranger to yourself. These ruptures, as painful as they may be, are invitations to question everything, to face what has been ignored for years. When you start saying no to what doesn't represent you, something magical happens. False bonds begin to dissolve. Relationships that existed solely because of your constant effort to please start to fade. Tasks that once seemed urgent now reveal themselves as pointless. Masks fall, silences become revelations, and here lies one of the greatest challenges, the solitude of awakening. Many people, when freeing themselves from the need to please, face a period of isolation. After all, much of their relationships were built on concessions, masks, and performances. When that collapses, what's left, this void, is frightening, but also fertile. Because for the first time, you begin to choose with awareness. You start filtering what enters your life. You begin to rebuild, brick by brick, an existence that makes sense. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche describes the process of the spirit that must die as a camel, the one who carries the burden, then become a lion, the one who says no, and finally a child, the one who creates itself. This journey is difficult, but it is the path to authenticity. In an era of superficiality, those who choose to live with depth pay a price, but the value of living in peace with oneself is incomparable. This chapter marks the turning point. It's where the pain of deconstruction begins to make room for the freedom of reconstruction. In the next chapter, we will understand what begins to bloom when you no longer live to please but to be. After the storm of detachment comes a strange silence, a void that at first seems frightening. But it is precisely from this emptiness that the first seeds of authenticity begin to sprout. Without the shackles of the need to please, you begin to observe yourself more clearly. The impulses that were once repressed now have space to emerge. What moves you? what paralyzes you, what truly belongs to you. This is where the philosophy of Søren Kierkegaard becomes relevant. For him, despair arises when we live disconnected from our true selves, and healing begins when we accept this anguish as part of the process of becoming who we really are. You begin to reconstruct your own narrative with more silence, more listening, more presence. Small decisions once neglected gain weight. How you spend your time, who you spend it with, what you consume. Nietzsche spoke of the will to power, a creative force that arises when we stop living for others, when we stop reacting and start acting. And acting here doesn't mean becoming productive or efficient. It means aligning action with inner truth. It's when you begin to say yes only to what resonates with what you feel. This is the beginning of integrity. Curiously, when you stop caring about external validation, you begin to attract people and opportunities more aligned with who you really are. It's as if the world responds to your truth, but this only happens after you allow yourself to walk through the desert of emptiness. No shortcuts, no masks. And then, for the first time, a new feeling emerges. Peace. There is a kind of silent strength that doesn't need to show off. It arises when you understand that you owe nothing to anyone but yourself. It's not arrogance, it's freedom. Seneca in his letters wrote, "The soul that has attained wisdom is invulnerable." This invulnerability doesn't come from being emotionally unreachable, but from no longer depending on approval to exist. From this point on, you begin to live more lightly, not because life has become easy, but because you've stopped carrying the weight of performance. You no longer need to prove you are good enough. You no longer need to compete or explain your choices to those unwilling to understand. This is where a paradox arises. When you stop caring, you care more, but in the right way. You care about what has meaning, what builds, what transforms. You stop living at the mercy of fleeting opinions and turn toward the foundations of your existence. Clarity appears. Direction is revealed. Actions are no longer impulsive. They become intentional. And when someone tries to manipulate you with guilt, fear, or emotional blackmail, you simply don't respond, because that language no longer reaches you. You're on another plane, not above, just outside the game. The game of ego contests, compulsive pleasing, and the need to be seen. You already see yourself. You already recognize yourself. You are already enough. In the end, all of this is about returning to what was lost in childhood, returning to what was buried in the name of acceptance, returning to being. The philosopher Plotinus said that self-knowledge is a journey back to the origin, to the one, not in a religious sense, but as a metaphor for reconnecting with essence. This essence does not need to be created. It needs to be unveiled. When you stop caring about the superficial, you begin to care about the essential. Little by little, life regains its flavor. Deeper relationships emerge. Solitude becomes inner companionship. Unanswered questions no longer bother you. They become part of the dance of mystery. You no longer feel urgency, nor fear, nor the need for control. There is an emotional maturity that allows you to navigate difficulties with serenity. And that is rare. It is precious. It is powerful. When you stop caring, it doesn't mean you've become indifferent. It means your attention is now focused on what truly matters. And that is true freedom, choosing what to care about. The world around you may not understand this change,